This is not a video put together with the intention of using one game to insult another. In fact, we are addressing that rhetoric. I'll kick this off by saying that this is entirely spoiler-free for both games, so don't be afraid to watch if you're avoiding spoilers. I just want to talk about the online discourse of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how the conversation has obviously steered back towards 16. Some say that it's not fair to compare them, and some say that it is. We'll talk about that. My experience with Rebirth has been remarkable, and I can't help but think about my last experience with this franchise, and honestly, I have to say something, because that's what I do. I'm Solace, this is Solace and Dread. We produce analytical content as well as reaction videos, primarily focused around Square Enix, Nintendo, and Capcom publications. If you want more nuanced discussions about gaming, consider subscribing, and please hit the like button, really helps us out, and it lets us and YouTube know that you like these kinds of videos. Alright, there's a lot of infighting going on in the Final Fantasy community, talking about the two games and whether people should compare them and what's a valid criticism, and then of course that rolls back into that dumb-ass discussion that always happens, what is a Final Fantasy? And it comes back up every couple of months in an endless waltz. Right now, it's red hot with the recent release of Rebirth, especially since Rebirth is being so universally acclaimed and accepted. Except for these fucking Moogles. Everyone is united in their hate for these ugly Moogles. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Final Fantasy XVI got a meta score of 87. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth scored a 92. They're close, and they're close in quality. So let's get this ridiculous sentiment out of the way. It is absolutely 100% okay to compare the games. Don't let these troglodytes on the internet tell you otherwise. People act like talking about the games is comparing Mario Wonder to Elden Ring or Tears of the Kingdom to Chrono Trigger. I also think that if you're unable to entertain the idea that one of these games made by Creative Business Unit 3 is missing a few things or that it's not perfect, then you probably don't have the emotional maturity to be in these conversations. The emotional meltdowns that I've read over discussions of 16's missteps is crazy. This is a literal touch grass moment, man. These are just product put out by a very large corporation. Comparing two games that had similar review scores in the same genre, in the same franchise, from the same publisher, with similar budgets, released within a year of each other. If you can't compare these two games, what on earth is okay to compare? So shut that bullshit up. The problem is people are sick of seeing 16 getting bashed. But these same people probably need to learn to swallow their feelings up a little bit. It's part of the toxic positivity of the Final Fantasy community. Everyone is so quick to be overly defensive of their favorite game and their favorite franchise, or their favorite developer, and it's so bad that they refuse to acknowledge any shortcomings of the product enough to have a rational conversation. I once got in an argument with a dude over Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, because I called it grindy. And the guy still hates me like 5 years later. Like, okay, these Yoshi P stands. Clowns like this aside, if you're gonna compare them fairly, it's probably best to do it with something tangible. You can talk about how Rebirth has minigames, controllable party members, gameplay that outside of combat is more than picking up an item or talking to an NPC or walking down a hallway. These are real, undisputed, and factual callouts, and things that 16 legitimately did not have. Also, it was an intentional choice to do that, which makes it worse when you see how happy everybody is to have the varied gameplay again. But when you say shit like, Rebirth has humor, compelling characters, and great storytelling, it's easy to argue that 16 had those too, because it did. And it did it well. This is when you get accused of shitting on one game to praise another. And honestly, you kinda deserve it. These are subjective, brain-dead buzzwords used by internet goblins to argue in online forums. And if you read through the reviews of Rebirth, the thing that got it the higher score. The one consistent thing that the game gets dinged on is the padded and meandering story and how the storytelling fell apart in the third act. That is not a consistent criticism for 16. So when you knock 16 and then praise Rebirth for things 16 did just as well, it kind of makes you look like an asshole. Now, it is safe and fair to say that Rebirth succeeded where 16 failed. Straight up. The side content, the multiple ways to interact with the game, the multiple controllable party members, the interactive side quests, all of it is a triumph. Yoshi P stands, chill, by the way. That doesn't mean that 16 is a failure, it's just missing a few things that people like. And conversely, as much of a masterpiece as Rebirth is, 16 still has some of the highest heights ever reached in a Final Fantasy. The ending of that story is far more impactful and complete than Rebirth's is, and I'll never forget how I felt after the Bahamut fight in 16. It's fair to say that Rebirth is lacking in a few areas, a couple of them where 16 shines. Not to mention that early reports of sales in Japan for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are showing massive drop-offs, and depending on international sales, it would not be completely out of place to say that 16 might eclipse Rebirth in sales overall, as it already is. There's a number of reasons to speculate there as to what the reason is, but the largest and most obvious to me is that this game is picking up in the middle of a very complex and very well-known story, and not playing Remake obviously hurts that experience. Despite the biggest lie ever told from Square Enix saying that you don't need to play Remake first. It's pretty obvious that a lot less people are willing to pick up a game in the middle of a story that doesn't have its proper beginning or its proper ending. You don't really have that problem with 16. Now, obviously, I do think that Rebirth is the better game, but only marginally. They're great, it's just both games have major flaws, and it's okay to compare them. The fact is, Final Fantasy has changed from a franchise where you know exactly what to expect to one where each game has similarities and staples, but the games are all a different flavor. 16 went dark and gritty. Rebirth is bright and flashy. 9 is heavy and whimsical. They're all different. I hope that 17 goes highly stylized to illustrate this point even further. What I don't like and never will is when people look at 16 and say it's not a Final Fantasy, or that it is a Devil May Cry game just called Final Fantasy. No, it's not. It is a Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy has been varied since 7. Each game has gotten more and more varied with similar elements to connect them. Final Fantasy XI is just as much of a Final Fantasy as 7, or as 13, or as 16. The franchise has been branching in new directions for the past 27 years. It's time to let go. It is. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. And long live the Turtle Kingdom.